Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. We've got a number of people still continuing to come in, but I think we'll kick off in order to keep to time as closely as we can. Catherine, do you have a few housekeeping issues before we start?
Yes, yeah, just normal ones as always, reminding everyone that we are, with Glenn's permission, kindly recording this session. So if you don't want to be part of the recording, please just keep your microphone and video off for the duration. Also, if you have any questions for Glenn, we will have a question and answer period following his presentation. But if things come to you during his talk, just put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring it and I can raise them during that time. So yeah, that's everything really.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Catherine. Okay, well, we'll kick off. Very, very brief introduction, so as not to take up too much time, but I am very, very pleased to introduce Professor Glenn Parry to everybody for this year's keynote of the FASS Festival of Research. Glenn has been a tremendous recent addition, or relatively recent addition to the university. Glenn comes in as a professor of digital transformation and the new, as of January the 1st, head of the Department of Digital Economy, taking over from Professor Annabel Gower, and so leading what we colloquially know as CODE. So I'm tremendously grateful to Glenn for all of his work for the university, and of course some significant recent successes as well, which I'm sure Glenn will talk about in part through his presentation. We have to finish by 2:45. And I'd like to include some time in there for questions as well. But with that, if you're ready, Glenn, I will hand over to you, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me do the technology bit, which is hopefully that one.
It's on, Glenn.
It's all good. Okay. Thank you. So first, thank you for asking me to come and keynote this wonderful festival. It's a great honour. It's also strange not to be in the room with you all, and I'm presenting in a small room to my computer, and it would have been so nice to see everybody, but I will endeavour to be, or try and be, interesting and keep to time. So I was asked to talk about collaborative research. And I thought, well, what does that mean? Well, it's how to know more than I know without too much work. And it's not just me, it's really me and many others. So what I'll talk about is, I'll start off with my research discourse, then I'll talk about some collaboration theory, and then I'll give you some practical examples from my work. So my main interest is in value, resources, and business models. And the title of my slide comes from Zimmerman, who says, resources are not, they become. And what he means by that is resources aren't really resources until you use them. So an umbrella isn't really useful until it stops raining. So what we see is all academic fields have a number of underlying discourses, and for me this idea of value, goodness, resources and business models are what interests me. So what makes that resource good? Why is it valuable? Value is really the measure of how good something is, and this idea is, resources are not valuable until they're used. We actually want the service of resources. And this is Edith Penrose's work, 1959. Resources themselves are the inputs to the process, but the services are what we want. And there's another idea here that you don't create value in a vacuum. Resources are always jointly involved in co-creating value. So resources can be people or objects, but it's bringing them together that allows value to happen. And that co-creation process happens in context, and those contexts can be different, so value outcomes are dynamic. So value is always co-created in context, and this to me was what makes business interesting. And then if we look at business models, so this is a very simple business model. So a business produces a value proposition. So it's not inherently valuable, it's just an idea or an object or a service. But the value of that proposition isn't realized until it is used and in the context of that use. And then the business somehow has to capture worth. Now, what it captures in terms of worth is often thought of as money, because you need money to sustain your business, to keep it going. But it can be many other things. But, you know, whatever your business, it's easy. I always say it's easy to be in the free lollipops business. Anyone can give away free lollipops and be very popular, but actually at some point you've got to buy the lollipops. So that's the sort of underlying theory of business models. So collaboration. Back in 1996, I published my first paper with Dr. Cameron Jones. I was a chemist back then. And this really got me into the idea of collaborative working and publication. And so for this talk, I looked at who I've collaborated with. And since then, I've published over 70 papers with a lot of different co-authors. There's 75 different people here. And it was a lot of fun finding pictures of them all. So why do I collaborate? Well, I'm a bit of a fan of you know, value and philosophy and looking deeper into why people value things, and you end up in these discussions on good and understanding what's true. And Gadamer's work comes up here, and he wrote philosophical hermeneutics, and who doesn't love to say philosophical hermeneutics? It makes me sound terribly academic. But hermeneutics is the way we seek to explain texts and understanding from different cultures. It's really the theory and method of interpretation, and we're seeking truth from interpreting often words. Gadamer was primarily driven by seeking to understand religious text and developed a method for interpreting what was true. And he examined what it was to understand. He said, when we read, we're always goal-oriented. And I like that, because I thought, yeah, whenever you read a paper or engage with something, you always got a reason for reading it as an academic, even if that's relaxing. He says you can't really be outside of the world. You're in it. You're a being in the world, so you can't separate yourself from context. And he said all individuals read with prejudice, and what he meant by that was a prejudgment. And actually, we can't open a door without really prejudging the situation. We come with a certain degree of knowledge that helps us understand the world. And he says, actually, if we can understand we have prejudices in many different forms, then we can engage and challenge our own prejudices. And he says we do that when we engage with individuals, texts, or ideas, and that forms something called the dialogue. So we challenge in dialogue. And in doing this, he said, we need to understand that when we seek to engage, we must have this concept called mercy, because we're always wrong. He said that, you know, Tate takes this on, we cannot reach this final objective solution because we continue to move through time. All we can hope to do is understand in a different way. And again, I really like that. I think that resonates with the way when you collaborate, you're always trying to understand in a different way and make those breakthroughs we all hope to make. So how do we apply this dialogue idea? Well, he says dialogue starts from a proposition, which maybe become between two subjects. Now, when you start, you have your knowledge horizon, and you start from your proposition. You have this shared understanding, this intersubjectivity, and that broadens your knowledge horizon. It expands your knowledge horizon, and that's your knowledge acquisition. And we can do this multiple times, and this leads to expanding knowledge horizons through hermeneutic cycles. So as we share with people of different understandings, our horizons are expanded, and that's essential for us through collaboration. Now, obviously, if you talk to people who come from your background, you can get stuck in a paradigm. Crises. This is Thomas Kuhn's idea. He said that if you're schooled in a particular way, you're influenced by one set of reasoning. And he said, you know, you require crises often to hear new and different ideas, often from younger members. And actually, why wait for crises? Go and proactively seek them out. Break from the older logics and explore those new paradigms, which I think is what business people and academics really want to do. Go and seek out interesting people. Now, Paul Theraband took this idea to the next level. He espoused anarchy, and he wrote, you know, a farewell to reason and against method. But though, you know, again, he was saying breakthrough was unlikely to come from those schooled in a paradigm. And while some people do jump on the bandwagon with this idea of anarchy, when you read his work, he does still demand rigor though radical ideas come from those not schooled. And it's also important to note that Theraband came with his original ideas after years of an academic, but he did travel globally and speak to a lot of interesting people. So I think the message here is, in collaborations, find really interesting people and speak to them. So let's look at some of the collaborations that I've been engaged with. So the first project I'm going to talk about is Trend. This is the Transdisciplinary Design Engineering project. It's an EPSRC project. It was 1.8 million. And it recognized that modern complex problems require transdisciplinary collaborative work to solve. Now, we look to understand transdisciplinary working processes and how to upskill people. And the idea is we'll meet the future manufacturing need of individuals and help them move into this transdisciplinary way of thinking. So this the thinking originated with Jean Piaget, super famous Swiss psychologist, who back in 1970 was speaking at a conference, the Centre for Educational Research and Innovation conference, which was joint with the French Ministry of Education. And he submitted a paper that sought to explore the differences between disciplinary and interdisciplinary research. Now, in his paper, almost as an aside in the closing paragraph, he said he thought there should be this higher level of disciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, that would cover not only just interactions between these specialized research projects, but would actually look for a total system beyond firm boundaries between disciplines, this sort of merging. Now, Jantz, 1972, published on this. He was really heavily influenced by this idea and created this hierarchy of approaches. So he said, you know, what's monodisciplinarity working? Well, that's lowest level of working, coordination within one discipline. Multidisciplinary working is different disciplines working together, but it lacks deeper coordination. And even if we work in interdisciplinary ways, the coordination is between disciplines is maybe there. None of them's really dominant. If we move into transdisciplinary working, he suggested here this is where we've got shared meanings, shared understandings, common social systems, cultures and values. And these are shared values because the work here is supposed to be purposive, and purposive work has shared societal benefit. And therefore, to be in a transdisciplinary way of working, really you're integrating science, social, economic, and political thought. And if we can maybe do that and have a shared set of values, then we can start to solve some of what are perhaps the more complex problems the world faces. So we're in this project, just to give you a flavour, there's 4 core company partners, Airbus, Cubic, Moog and Renishaw, manufacturing engineering firms. We've got 12 academics, mainly engineers, but Bath, Bristol and Surrey universities. And what we're doing is we've got this team developing tools and methods for transdisciplinary working. We're particularly interested in how can we measure if a project or a team is transdisciplinary. Where do we need to be transdisciplinary, and quite crucially, where do we not? Where is it good to be, you know, in your paradigm as a specialist? Okay, so my next project I'm going to talk about, this is the Ohms Project, the Optimizing Mean Manufacturing System. It's an on-body therapeutic manufacture. It's a £2 million EPSRC project. We have a number of leading universities engaged in this. So this is very much this purposeful transdisciplinary challenge. So Kymriah is a treatment for B-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Now, that's a blood cancer. Its treatment, Kymriah, is one of the first CAR T-cell therapies that was made available on the NHS. Now, this particular treatment is bespoke because we make it from the cells of the individual patient. Treatment is expensive. The NHS prices are £282,000 for one dose. It's about $500,000 in the States. Now, B-cell cancer is the most common type of cancer in children, but it does represent only 2.6% of cancers, with lung, breast, colorectal and prostate being the larger cancers. Facilities are struggling to produce the therapeutics at the current rate of demand. Production is US-based in labs, made by experts with open handling, which can lead to errors and contamination, all those other things. Machine-based is possible. We can have single machines that can generate this. But if you buy the machine, the single machine is 150,000 plus consumables of £20,000 per run, and you're very much locked into the supplier of this machine if you follow that route. So it's a very capital intensive way of dealing with the problem of manufacture. So I think every researcher at some point likes to think that they can help cure cancer, and this sort of came up for me. Now, Dr. Rob Barker at Kent is a chemist, and he'd been speaking with Dr. Qasim Rafiq at UCL, who's a biochemist and an expert in the manufacture of T-cell chemistry and these particular therapeutics. Now, they'd assembled a team, Phil's from Cambridge Electrical Engineer, Morella Biosensors at Bath, Rob Fluid Dynamics, Veronica Manufacturing. They were looking at this machine I mentioned that manufactures it, the Clinimax Prodigy. They'd looked at the diabetes machine and said, well, can we shrink this down, put it on body? And they come to the point where they thought this thing's way too expensive. Now, as all good ideas tend to be, I was having a drink with Rob in a bar, and I said, think about your business model. If you look at the printer, that's actually, it's quite a complex, expensive device, but you make your money on your ink. So can we mass produce this, give it to everybody that needs it, get economies of scale, drive the price down? And he said, that's great, I want you on the project. So this is the sort of challenge we're facing. Just a quick look at the process. This is a centralized manufacture. Got a patient in hospital. Leukapheresis, we take the blood. Logistics, we freeze it, transport it. It's taken to the laboratory where those cells are enriched and they're activated. Then we do this gene transfer, which is the CAR T-cell bit that gives you the receptors, and those receptors target the cancerous cells. You'll notice it looks a bit like the SARS virus there. Then you take that cell and you expand it, so you grow them, freeze, transport, and then you do a whole bunch of tests to make sure it's viable and safe before you reinfuse. So that's the centralized process, what we realized is the body is a great bioreactor. So we can lose a number of those, take it onto the body, and have this much simpler process for an on-body system. And we've moved to the point where we've got sort of benchtop prototype. These are the actual physical parts of our new device in development. So the blood we take, and we have this microfluidic blood separator. It works like a little centrifuge, as T cells are bigger, so we can separate them by effectively spinning them through our little, I don't know if you can see it particularly well, but they're a little spiral in there. We then flow it through a tube where we've activated the surface chemically, and the T cells stick to that, so we can capture them. We then squirt in our plasmid, so it becomes like a soup. To get the plasmid in the cell, we electroshock them using something called electroporation. The cells just pop open very briefly, the plasmid goes in. Pre-release, we test it. This, again, it's a surface that attracts the active T cells, and it works like a capacitor, and you can see that they're attracted. We've got fail-safing throughout, so if there's any problem, nothing goes into the patient. This is Phil's part, which is the low power control device to control it all. And the bit I've been looking at is the business model, and also when we do this, what's the support system. So we've been interviewing the nurses in the hospital and people who are home and patients, and really understanding how we can support this device in a different context. So moving the context from maybe in the hospital to home. So that's really been an exciting piece of work. So another project, the Hub of All Things. It's a personal data platform that we built to give individuals control over their personal data. So you're probably all familiar with some of these ideas, but currently there are a few dominant digital firms who dominate the market. They take your data, you don't really get to use it, and often you have to repeat data entry when you go into other places. Who knows what they're doing with your data? It's getting lost, it's getting abused. I mean, just look at the spam you get. So you're putting your information into all these different apps. They're sharing it, and it gets more and more hidden what's happening to your data as it goes further back. So the challenge to take back control of data. So again, collaborators, and we're still largely working together after quite a few years, but we started with 7 professors from business, engineering, art, design, and computer science. We had 9 original collaborator firms, Glaxo, Dyson, a few names you probably know. We've now had over £3 million funding, probably double that. And we've also got a startup company, DataSwift, and that's into its 4th round of investor funding. So what we did was we developed a decentralized data platform. We call them PDAs, personal data accounts. It's a bit, if you like email. You hold your data in the cloud, a bit like email, it's yours. An app you download might create this personal data account for you, but it can then be reused, so you don't have to re-enter all your own data. But it's a bit more than Dropbox or some form of cloud storage. So here's you, and you've got your personal data account, and the apps are linking to it and reusing your data. But you only share the minimal amount of data that you want. For instance, if you had an age verification app, all they need to know, for instance, to access a pub is you're older than 18. It doesn't need to know your date of birth. It doesn't need to know your name or anything else. You try and keep those data interactions to the minimal viable exchange. What makes it a bit cleverer is something we call the Smart Hat Engine. And this is an algorithm. It effectively turns your data store into a mini computer. What that means is, if I give you the example of insurance, instead of you sending all your information off to an insurance company, the insurance company could send an algorithm to you, and that algorithm churns through all your data, works out your risk profile for whatever it might be, life insurance, and then it can tell you, look, we've done the analysis, it's going to cost you this. And all they really need to send back to the insurance company is some hash maybe that says, look, we've looked at all the data, and based on the data we've got, this is the price and this is the insurance that this individual is buying from you. So really minimal data exchanges. So only metadata really needs to be returned, not the actual data. And firms really like this because it overcomes any GDPR issues. They don't have to hold data that's sensitive, so they're less prone to being hacked. So that's what that project's all about. So the final example of my projects is the new Centre for the Decentralised Digital Economy. It's led by Surrey, working with Edinburgh Uni, both law and art schools, as well as the government's digital catapult. So the aim is to create a fairer digital future. And what we want is to transform towards a digital economy, much like following that HAT model, where it's decentralized, where it's peer-to-peer, where everybody's really a consumer as well as a producer. If you look at sort of distributed models, think about how value is co-created. Look at TikTok, look at YouTube, Instagram. We'll examine the emerging decentralized digital economy from 3 perspectives: how value is co-created, looking at content creation, consumption, how we identify with and use digital service, and how they're manipulating data and manipulating us, how this affects the way individuals and employers interact, and if we had control, could that be different? Some particular examples of projects I'm engaged in. I'm looking at blockchain to create trust in processes. So if you look at consumers demanding evidence for provenance, for implementing supply chain. So provenance is, where did my stuff come from? If we take case studies, we've been looking at organic grain, fish, wine, baby food, chocolate. To give you the baby food example, that's a company called TechRock. What we found there was examples of contamination in baby food in China, and TechRock had put an RFID tag on a tin of baby food. And when you scan it, it's logged exactly where it is. The consumer gets a photo of the actual tin they bought, so they can see if it's been tampered with. And if it has been opened, that RFID tag is broken and it can't be fixed. This allows you to have what we call visibility of the supply chain. You can track it through. Now we're looking at how we can use this sort of technology to trace things. At the moment, I'm working on chocolate and cocoa from Ecuador, because there's lots of problems with abuse and modern slavery, it's called, in supply chains. And we're looking at, can we use technology to track the flow of chocolate? So blockchain holds data that can be used of this process veracity. It helps consumers and auditors ensure products and processes are as they claim. We can protect the product against counterfeit and provide evidence of process. And we really, blockchain is really just it creates a list that's very difficult to change. And we're really looking at, when is that really useful? And where it's useful is in systems. It helps create this perception of trust. So we've worked with business to co-create initial project scenarios within Decade. So going forward within the centre, we're looking at content provenance for media, so fighting fake news, pushing hashes into images, trying to understand where it came from. We're looking at content creation. So there's a couple of ideas here. So that's if we can put tracking into your mobile phone with your permission, maybe you can share your footage and provide micropayments back to the news channel who might want it, or if it's a concert, everyone can share their images and give their view, and you can get a much more immersive experience. We're looking at decentralized work, this record in the gig economy. And if you say nursing, for example, want to keep a register, and the nurse might work across multiple agencies, we get this list of where they've worked and when that's verified. We're also looking at commodifying personal data. For our example here is if you checked into a hotel, maybe you shared IoT data, sensor data of what you did, how you slept, all that sort of thing, and you'll get a discount for sharing that. So again, it's a team. many from this university and from others, and we keep bringing different people in from Paris, from China, from all over the place, keep the ideas fresh. 34 different firms, partner organizations, very collaborative, 6 million in business support. And that's business, government organizations, technology services, all giving insights into ways of looking at problems. So I collaborate to achieve more. That's what I try and do. I've managed to raise over 43 million in funding, published 70 papers. But that wasn't all me. That was working with others. It's, you know, developing a discourse that interests me. Like I said, mine's value, business, what good means. You know, I share my ideas, always love to work with other people. I listen to what they do. I tell them what I do, and, you know, let them fit in with you, understand your discourse. And it's that idea of being radical, but being practical. So whilst I like to work with the crazy ideas, it's always got a practical and definitive way forward. So that's enough from me. I've written books, I've got all these projects, I've got Twitter, I've got LinkedIn, lots of ways of engaging. So yeah, hopefully I'm right on time at 2:35.